Welcome to Introductions for Understanding the Intractable Problem of Substance Abuse in the Legal Profession. My name is Dean Serwin. I am the section chair for the wellness section here at the Beverly Hills Bar. I'm going to introduce our speaker, David Mann. David is a graduate of Ohio State University, which I won't hold against him being from Ann Arbor, and Stanford Law School. He served as deputy public defender in San Francisco before becoming a solo criminal defense practitioner. After 12 years of practice, substance abuse-related issues caused him to resign from the bar with disciplinary charges pending. Very honest of you there, David. Following a relentless battle with addiction, which included numerous hospitalizations and periods of living on the streets, he succeeded in getting clean and sober in 1998. Since then, he's worked, among other things, as a cab driver, a private investigator, a paralegal, and a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor. He presently serves as the Northern California consultant to the Other Bar, a statewide organization of recovering attorneys, judges, and law students. In this capacity, he spends his time providing outreach and education to the legal community and assisting attorneys as they struggle with substance abuse and related challenges that threaten their ability and/or eligibility to practice law. So before we get started, I'd like to thank you, David. I'd like to congratulate you on your sobriety and thank you for giving back and for being here with us today. With that, take it away, David.
Thanks, Dean, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. So this is called the Intractable Problem of Substance Abuse in the Legal Profession, which is a new name I came up with just because I think it's really accurate to describe the problem as intractable. I've been working exclusively in my sort of quasi-rehab capacity for over 15 years now with lawyers, and they're the most difficult population to work with, but they also are in a profession where there are structural components to the profession that make them more susceptible to, counterintuitively, to addiction than any other profession. And there's quite a bit of studies and statistics that validly document and back up that contention. What I try to do, this is a required unit, as was mentioned, and I try to make this topic worthwhile. If you've been around for a while, every 3 years you take this thing, people get a little cynical, and I'm in front of a live audience. I can sort of see the grumpiness of the old timers and wonder why they have to take this thing again and again. So I try to make it worthwhile, and I try to do that by addressing some of the things I think don't get addressed. And my goal basically is to make you believe that this problem is as serious as it is, and then make you understand why that is, because it's not random. There's some, as I mentioned, there's some amazing things that go on with regard to the relationship between addiction and the legal profession. And my basic operating thesis, as you'll hear as it folds out, is that the addiction is a very strange, peculiar, and unique disease. And the legal profession is kind of a strange and peculiar and unique profession. And you could not have designed a profession more likely to succumb to addiction than the law. And you couldn't have designed a disease more likely to afflict lawyers than addiction. So, it remains counterintuitive that lawyers have this problem, but the statistics that are out there are amazing. I used to use a number that I was hoping was wrong, and I hoped it was wrong because things had improved and it was too high. I find out a number of years ago with the now definitive and uniformly cited study that my number was wrong because it was too low and things have gotten worse. So if you're interested, if you Google Patrick Krill along with ABA Betty Ford Foundation, you'll find a study that has now become the go-to cited source for this number. And the number is 20.5% of attorneys are said to succumb to some form of addiction during the course of their career, their lives, which is almost twice the amount that's attributed to the general population, which is 11%. And it's also 1 out of 5 lawyers. And we beat out every other profession. Dentists, I think, are second, which is interesting to me. They have access to prescription pads and all kinds of goodies, and I think, dealing with difficult clients who hate lawyers is one thing, but being a dentist where everybody dreads going to see you and you're going to inflict pain on them might cause some discomfort that needs self-medication. Anyway, we're number one. We have these horrible numbers. And for that reason alone, statistically, the state bar wants you to take this course. As you know, they're in charge of the well-being of the profession. They're in charge of the reputation of the profession, and they're in charge of protecting the public from bad actors in the profession. And this course presumably provides more knowledge about this problem. Knowledge is power. If for everybody who listens to this thing, one or two people realize that it may apply to them, and then they take action and do something about it, it's one or two less people who are going to be dysfunctional and incompetent performing their jobs. And, so we have this problem statistically, reputation-wise. The legal profession is not popular in the general public. I don't know of any other profession that has its own genre of jokes, right? Lawyer jokes. And if you know a lawyer joke that has a punchline that's complimentary to the profession or to lawyers, I'd like to hear it, but most of them aren't. And one of the stereotypes is that of the drunken trial lawyer. And that actually goes back as far as Shakespearean times. There's a couple plays that have a drunken barrister reeling on and off of the set through the whole show. So we don't want to reinforce that stereotype, but we also need to protect the public. And if you think about it, of professions that can have this disease, you want to juxtapose two extremes. One of them is the profession of being a barista at the Starbucks, and the other one's being a lawyer. If the barista becomes an alcoholic, there's going to be all of the health consequences, the family consequences, the financial consequences, maybe the legal consequences, but professionally, not too much. Screw up your latte, start stealing some money from the cash register, stop showing up to work, fired, end of professional consequences. But as a practicing attorney, that the consequences of the work you do are very significant for your clients. And if you're dysfunctional and making mistakes, the concentric circles of societal and economic repercussions can be extreme. A bad clause in a contract results in years of protracted litigation and expensive litigation. You make a mistake in somebody's trust and estate plan, and families are litigating over the distribution of assets for years. You're a prosecutor and you don't do your job well, and somebody who is legitimately dangerous and needs to be locked up for the protection of the rest of us goes free. You're a defense lawyer and you don't do your job right, and somebody who by all rights should not have gone to prison goes to prison. So when we're not up to snuff because of drinking or drugging, it's a bad thing. And as proof of that, you all used to get the California Lawyer magazine in your mailbox if you've been around a while. Now I think it still comes out electronically online, but usually when I ask this question, I get some laughs and knowing smiles. And the question is, what is your guilty pleasure when you first get your California Lawyer magazine? And what people do is page back to the discipline section, right? And there's 5 pages of lawyers in trouble, and it's like Jerry Springer for lawyers. And, they've commingled funds, and they've missed filing deadlines, and they've abandoned clients. And you look at this thing, it comes out every month. There's 15 people in there, and you wonder legitimately, what is wrong with our profession? So there's good news and bad news about that. And the good news is, in spite of that, there aren't that many dishonest, evil, incompetent lawyers in the state of California. The bad news is there's a lot of impaired lawyers because, and this is a number from the state bar discipline system, 70% of the people who show up in that discipline section of that magazine turn out to have an underlying problem with alcohol, drugs, or things like anxiety and depression, or a combination of it. So we want to keep ourselves as healthy as possible. The idea is you take this course, it's going to remind you that the problem exists and hopefully encourage you to be mindful of how much of what you hear might apply to you. So, I'm not going to be speaking directly to how you can sit down and analyze yourself, but I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be the structural parts of this profession that cause people to have trouble And I encourage you to think about those, think about whether they apply to you, and then think about what, if anything, you can do to minimize the effect that they have on you, because there are things that you can do. You know, the problem, as I said, is kind of intractable because it's part of the culture. It's built into the profession. These problems that are not going to go away, no matter how hard we try, because they're, as you will see, they're just built in. But you can certainly be aware of what's going on and try to protect yourself. So I want to talk first a little bit about the Other Bar, because I'm under contract with the Other Bar. I'm there under the auspices of them. So we're a nonprofit. We've been around for 45 years. We're a 501c3. We survive on donations, which if you want to make one, we would appreciate it. You go to our website, otherbar.org. There's a PayPal function. But our mission is to help California lawyers who have problems with substance abuse, alcohol, or other problems. Hoarding, gambling, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And to that end, we do things, not many, but in many cases, we're the only entity that does what we do. And it's my belief, based on 15 years of watching us have the effect we have on turning people's lives around and preventing disasters, that we're good at what we do. So we have a website, otherbar.org. I invite you to visit that. That has resources, referrals, and information about this whole topic. We publish and distribute these brochures. If we were live, I'd make sure you all had one of these that sort of synopsize what we're all about. They have our website address on it, but they also have our phone number. It's an 800 number, 24-hour hotline. It rings through to my cell phone, and you can call anytime with a question about yourself, a concern about yourself or a colleague. And what I do, it's completely confidential, it's free, and it's voluntary. And I gather information from whoever calls and do my best to put them, after the call is over, in a better position to deal with what they're having to deal with than they were beforehand. And that might mean some advice, that might mean some instructions, that might mean volunteering for me to participate in an intervention with them or their firm or their family. It might mean a referral and resources to different types of programs that are available. And I do my best to treat them as a temporary client, and as I used to have when I worked in treatment programs, and take them from where they are to where they need to be, and alleviate whatever the triage-like situation is that caused them to call. So that's what we do. The other thing, though, we do is provide these CLEs, and because it's a required unit, I do almost 50 of these a year, and I have a colleague in Southern California who also does about that many, and that gets us in front of tens of thousands of lawyers. And the point is to enlighten you all a little bit about this problem. Also, though, to make you realize that maybe you want to pick up the phone and give us a call. And people do. And when they do, a lot of times it starts a process that solves what was a building and likely to be terrible problem if it didn't get addressed. So that's the Other Bar, and that's why I'm here to talk to you. So this problem in the profession, it's counterintuitive. We don't think of lawyers as drug addicts and alcoholics typically. I think it becomes easier to understand the problem with lawyers if you spend a little bit of time first just understanding the problem of the disease of addiction, because it's a unique and powerful and perverse disease. And if you start describing it before you have gotten very far down your list of descriptors, you will have left every other disease behind. There's nothing else like it. And I submit you can do that same thing with the legal profession. You can leave everything else behind when you start describing some of its inherent features. So let's start with the disease of addiction. It is a disease, according to the American Medical Association, which means that you have all the same rights if you have this disease as if you had any other disease, HIV, cancer, you name it. HIPAA applies, the right to health insurance, the right to medical leave, the right to confidentiality. All of that applies to this disease. The problem is that people don't, even though it's a disease, think of it that way. It still has sort of a stigma to it, and people consider it a moral failing. That tends to block people from getting the help they need. Nobody's too embarrassed to admit they have cancer, but people tend to be embarrassed to admit that they have a problem with drinking or other addictions. But here's this disease. It's a chronic, progressive, fatal brain disease. Chronic means there's no cure. You can put it in remission, but you still have it. You're responsible for some ongoing treatment to keep it in remission. If you don't, it can come out of remission. It's called a relapse. Other chronic diseases are diabetes, cancer. You manage your blood sugar levels, your insulin. You go to chemo. You get radiation, and if you're lucky, you put it in remission, but you need to do some things to keep it there. Progressive means that it will get worse unless it's dealt with. And a lot of things we get aren't progressive. A cold, a flu, an infection, those start off and they follow a trajectory. They get an upward trajectory, but they max out like a bell curve. And with the passage of time and the operation of an intact immune system, they go away. This disease does not do that. It starts off very slowly, but then once it picks up its upward trajectory, it will continue on that trajectory unless it is explicitly, overtly dealt with. It has to be treated or it will not get better on its own. And then if it's not treated, it goes on to the last of the triumvirate I just mentioned of traits. It's fatal. It kills people. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents, overdoses, cirrhosis of the liver. Many ways this disease is fatal. And it's a brain disease. And what that means is once you have this disease, your brain is in scientifically measurable and observable ways different from a normal brain. And the basic thing that has happened is your reward system has gotten turned on its head, and your brain has been convinced that something that's not good for you, drinking or taking drugs, is good for you and has survival value, and it tells you to compulsively pursue this behavior. The other main thing that happens with your brain is the relationship between your reptile brain, which is primitive, and it's your limbic brain, it's survival, it's appetites, it's drives, and your prefrontal cortex, your intellectual brain, has changed. Typically, as humans, what distinguishes us is our prefrontal cortex, the brain we use to make important decisions and write briefs, can overpower our limbic brain. It can keep the appetites in place. We don't hit each other over the head and steal each other's food. We don't act like animals. And what happens when you have this disease is your reptile brain starts to overpower your intellectual brain. And the reason that happens is it's driven by neurotransmitters that change how you feel. When you take a drug that makes you feel good, that is because that's a reward behavior, and it releases dopamine. And you're never supposed to be able to release as much dopamine as you can with a powerful drug. The dopamine we're supposed to feel comes from eating a good meal, and doing other things that are good for us. And those things cause pleasure. That's the reward. So that we will eat, because if we don't eat, we will starve and survive. Sex is pleasurable because of a release of dopamine, because as a species, if we don't engage in that behavior, we'll fail to reproduce and go extinct. You take a drug that feels good, and your limbic brain thinks that it has survival value, and it tells you, like it says with food, you should eat. But when you take too much of a drug, it has bad side effects. When you have this disease, at first you try the substance, and it usually works for you, and then you repeat the behavior. But if you repeat it, pretty soon you use more and more of it, and that's because of habituation. Your body and your brain adjust. It doesn't work, so you need to take more. And then you get to dependence. As you take more and more, your body and your brain get to where they've adjusted so much that you can't do without it. So you're taking a lot of this drug. It's not doing what you want it to do, but it's doing a bunch of bad things. And it's hard to quit because you get intense withdrawals if you try to quit. And in a complete final stage of addiction, you have lost control. You don't have the ability to quit anymore. And that's even if you can recognize that you have this problem and know and decide that you have to quit. But there's another characteristic of this disease that precludes that, and it's called denial. This is one of the few diseases that it has a characteristic that tells you, because of your brain being changed, that you don't have it. People defend it. They deny it. And they're not lying. When you tell them they're an alcoholic and they say no, they're speaking their own truth. And the problem is, and we say in recovery, you can't fix a broken brain with a broken brain. So your main survival tool to fix anything is your brain. But in this situation, your brain is severely compromised. It's telling you you don't have this problem and you need help, and you have to admit the problem before you can get that help, but you deny it. So there's perversely only two areas of human endeavor I know where the term denial, the word denial is a term of art, and one is addiction psychology, and the other one is the law. We deny the request for admissions. We deny the allegations. No self-respecting attorney admits anything, right? Well, you got to admit you're an alcoholic if you're going to get the help you need to solve the problem, and you're not going to be able to solve it on your own. The other thing is most people have gone through a period of whatever they're using where they used it successfully. I drank for 15 years and it wasn't a problem. Now I'm getting DUIs and I'm getting in trouble at work, and I have to drink in the morning. Why can't I just go back to where I was and do it the right way? You can't. But people try, and they don't want to recognize that if the primary symptom is loss of control, then you can't regain the control. And therefore, the solution is total abstinence. And that's why alcoholics go to meetings, and you need to stop completely. And it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that. So this is a really bad disease. You don't want to have it, right? So the next question is, why does anybody have this disease? Why does anybody become an alcoholic or an addict if it's so terrible? We all know drugs are bad. There's a war on drugs. Just say no to drugs. Don't become a drug addict. So the question is good. Why does that happen to people? But it's kind of based on a faulty premise, which is that people decide and choose to become drug addicts, which is absurd. Nobody decides to have a chronic, progressive, fatal brain disease. That just doesn't happen. So the key to understanding this is to understand that there's another word for drugs, and the word is medicine. And every addict and alcoholic I've worked with, of the hundreds over the years I've been doing this, describes their drug of choice, the thing that ended up trying their best to kill them and ruin their life, as something they thought of as their medicine when they first found it and started using it. And it's usually true, that it did help them. So people don't make a choice to become an addict. They make a smaller, benign, incremental, and sometimes rational choice to introduce a chemical to their brain and their body so they can change the way they feel or be the way they want to be. And I divide these chemicals into 4 categories: up, down, around, and off. Up is energy, stimulants. Down is relax, depressants. Around is change your reality, get a break from normal reality. That's things like, hallucinogens and marijuana. And then off is go to sleep, Ambien, Lunesta, things like that. So up, down, around, and off. Those are the 4 directions we can go in life and with chemicals. And in each case, it's legitimate to need to do those things. Sometimes you need more energy. You got to get that brief written. Sometimes you need to relax. Sometimes you need to escape. Sometimes you need to go to sleep. And in each case, there's a healthy way to do it. If you need more energy, take a 2-hour nap, jump in the shower, refreshing, cool shower, go back to your desk, finish writing your brief. If you need to relax, roll out the yoga mat, assume the lotus position, do some deep breathing, meditate, you can relax. If you need to escape, go on a vacation, immerse yourself in a culture where they speak a different language, some faraway exotic place, go into the jungle, the mountains, the ocean, and you can get a reality break. There's healthy ways to get to sleep. Taken together, they're called sleep hygiene. But in each case, doing those things the healthy way requires, in some combination, one or all of the following: time, money, and discipline. It takes 2 hours to take a 2-hour nap. Meditation takes time, and they call it a discipline. It takes time and money to go on vacation, and so on. So if you're chronically short on time and or money, and maybe a little bit deficient in the discipline department, these chemical shortcuts become very attractive because they will do whatever you want and need them to do, like that. And they do it better than anything in nature. And that is sort of the pernicious evil thing about drugs. So, the war on drugs has been going on forever. And every year, the worst year is always last year. The flavor of the month changes. It was crack in the 80s. It was crystal meth in the 90s. Now it's fentanyl. But, the number of overdose deaths, the toll this takes on society, if you add up the amount of money we spend on legal problems, accidents, injuries, medical treatment, incarceration, divorce. Altogether, it might be the most expensive problem we have as a society, and we cannot get a handle on it. And I don't see it happening anytime soon. So another pet little theory of mine is that, Einstein is supposed to have said with the advent of nuclear weapons that he thought in that regard, our technology may have surpassed our humanity, meaning as humans, we had come up with something with our little brains that was so big and powerful that in the fullness of time, we might prove unable to control it and it could destroy us. And that could still happen. I think that with the current state of technology and the availability of highly refined pills, powders, and potions that can instantly change the way we feel, that our technology may have surpassed our humanity, that we're just not equipped intellectually, neurologically, biologically, sociologically, psychologically to deal with the temptation and the consequences that are presented by the availability of all these chemicals. So, and by the way, the problem comes down to this. Any drug has its desired effects and its undesirable side effects. So one aspirin will cure your headache and a bottle could kill you. It's the same thing with all these drugs of abuse. A little bit is usually not that bad of a thing. But when you need more and more and you take more and more and eventually, you're taking a devastating amount and you're getting more side effects than desired effects, that's when the problem happens. So that is how people become addicts. They start off with something that helps them and they're walking down the road of life and it's helping them. But then they start to lean on it and pretty soon they need it to walk down the road of life. And then pretty soon they can't do without it. But by that time, it's providing way less benefit than it is harm, and they are stuck because they can't quit without a lot of help. So that is the bizarre and perverse and powerful way that people become addicts. People don't decide that they want this to happen to them. So that's how it happens to anybody. Now, why does it happen to lawyers so much? So I had to think about this because, we are distinguished from other professions because we're number one. So what distinguishes us from other professions? And people will propose stress when I ask, what do you think the problem is with lawyers? Stress. And obviously that's true. But there's a lot of other stressful professions, and yet we're number one. So what is it about the legal profession that makes us number one? And working with hundreds of lawyers and paying attention to what goes on and analyzing what goes on in this profession and how it relates to addiction, I've come up with basically 4 broad categories of things that I think are the biggest factors that cause lawyers to have this problem. And the first one is our personalities. And there's been tons of studies done about the lawyer personality profile. Lawyers have been experimented with more than lab rats, and there's a sort of a agreed upon consensus lawyer personality profile. And you can find this in any number of books. There's one that sort of started the ball rolling by a woman named Susan Dykoff. It's called Lawyer Know Thyself. But I'm going to read you this personality profile of the lawyers. I've learned to give a disclaimer before I do this because taken together, they sound kind of nasty. You wouldn't want to know this person. But note, and this is not inconsequential, that a lot of these by themselves actually can help us do some of the things we need to do as lawyers. But it turns out when you put them all together, it creates a profile that might make you a good lawyer, but not necessarily a good spouse or a good friend or somebody who has a good relationship with themselves. So this may not be you, but you may know this person. The lawyer personality profile: controlling, ego-driven, high-achieving, competitive, more comfortable with thoughts than feelings, more motivated by external than internal rewards, perfectionism, negative thinking. The trait that correlates highest with membership on the law review and high academic performance in law school is pessimism. It sounds weird, but think about it. What do we do? The bar exam, what is that? Issue spotting. What is that? You look for things that are going to go wrong. And that's what we do, What is a contract? It's 2 pages of what the parties are going to do and 15 pages of what's going to happen if they don't do it, right? So it helps you be a good lawyer if you can spot those potential problems. It's our job to keep them from happening, right? So far, kind of not happy things here, right? So you're going to like this next one: above average intelligence. Most of us will cop to that one, right? Yeah. And now we go down the rabbit hole again. Self-centered, compulsive, grandiose, tending to be tense as opposed to relaxed. And finally, we make our intrepid way through the enchanted forest of the legal profession. This is our lions and tigers and bears, argumentative, opinionated, and judgmental. Oh my, right? Now, those last three sound particularly harsh, but think about it. We go to court and write briefs to make our argument. We do it to try to get a favorable judgment, and it comes in the form of an opinion. What's your argument going to be? Did you read the opinion? Did we get the judgment? Bam, it's the trifecta of legal thought. The first one on the list, controlling. It's first because it's the most important, but I've been asked, why is it even there? I just got done saying the addict's symptom is loss of control. If you're a full-blown addict, you have lost control. But if you are the type of personality who succumbs to the temptation to put a chemical in your body to instantly change the way you feel, that's a pretty controlling personality trait. Not everybody's willing to do that. But figuratively speaking, when you do that, what you're trying to do is slap a dial on the side of your head that says up, down, around, off, now. And so you take that all together, and what it basically tells me is that by personality, we are predisposed to be susceptible to addiction. And then the profession comes along and makes it worse. Three primary ways, I think. One is our compensation. If you're on the partnership track, you're doing well, you've been a lawyer for a little while, you're making a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's nice. Nothing wrong with making a lot of money, right? But most people who make that kind of money, they do their job and they cash their paycheck. We do our job and we bill by the hour. And we bill, back when I worked at big firms for a little while, it was quarter hours. Now it's tenths of an hour, right? You know this. And it's 6-minute segments. And, this is such a modest, I've been told this is a stupidly low hourly rate, but I haven't practiced for a while. So I use 500 an hour because the math works easily. So you're billing at $500 an hour and 6-minute segments. You get to work in the morning, 6 minutes, $50. 6 minutes, $50. 6 minutes, $50. How long do I have to do that before it becomes a little bit annoying? Probably already is, right? Yeah. All day, all week, all month, all year. Better add up to 2,000 or something if you want to be on the partnership track. That's nuts. You go to the bathroom and you think of a case while you're in there so you can bill the time when you come out. I had a good idea in there, $50. But what this does is fundamentally change our relationship with time. I submit to you that most people don't run around thinking of their time in 6-minute segments they have to justify, but we do, and it spills over. Somebody tells you got to wait in line half an hour for a table at a restaurant, and some little part of you says, "Really? Are you going to give me $250? That's what my time is worth." But it also affects you in ways that go straight to your wellness. You could go out, sit on the park bench, see the birds, watch people roller skate, eat your lunch out of a bag and get some fresh air, look at the sky and go back to your desk. Or you could stay at that desk and bill another hour. You could leave work early and go to your kid's soccer practice and kid would be happy, it'd be fun. Or you could stay a little late at work and bill a couple hours. So that pressure is always there. And it directly affects the attractiveness of shortcuts. Right? I could meditate for an hour, but I need to bill this hour. I could take a 2-hour nap, but I need to bill these 2 hours, and so on. So when you don't have enough time, you look for a shortcut. The chemical shortcuts are there. Lawyers use them, and that helps us get in trouble. The next thing that comes along is the adversarial system. Have you guys heard of this? The adversarial system. What a system. Equally qualified professionals going up against each other in a public forum and doing battle with great consequence, and somebody wins and somebody loses. And sometimes the losers don't get paid. Damn, that's kind of intense. That's what we do. You would like to think a bunch of professionals who go to school until they're 26 years old and then, do a rite of passage and take the bar exam in order to get a state granted license to practice their profession would cooperate with each other in a collegial fashion towards a common goal. Architects do that. Engineers do that. Doctors do that. We fight it out. Somebody's trying to do something, we're trying to keep them from getting it done. Adversarial. What other profession is adversarial? I'm glad there's not adversarial medicine. How'd you like to go to the ER? There's three doctors on each side of your gurney. These three are trying to save you, and these three are trying to kill you. That wouldn't be good. But you know what profession does that? Sports, professional sports, the Super Bowl, competitive, high pressure, a winner and a loser. So you got the Super Bowl athlete, the football player, and you got the lawyer, and you got the game and the trial, and you got the victory, and you have the $5 million verdict. And in each case, the lawyer and the football player are going to be motivated to do everything they can under nature to prepare for this hugely consequential event. And the football player has his innate gifts and his training and his strategy and the quality of his team and his opponents and the quality of their, whatever they're able to bring to this. And the lawyer has his education, his intelligence, his training, his experience, the quality of his legal strategy, the quality of his team, and the quality of the opponent. And in each case, they can both do everything under nature to prepare for this event. And then they're going to hit a wall. And the only thing left to do is get up in the morning and go to the kickoff or go pick the jury and hope for the best. Well, with those kinds of consequences on the line, both of them, the football guy and the lawyer, are going to try to figure out a way over, around, or through that wall, or a way to push it back a little bit. And if the wall is needing to get sleep, or the wall is needing to have more energy, or the wall is needing to relax for a while, there's a way to do it with drugs and alcohol. So the lawyers do it. They use drugs for performance enhancement. You take an Adderall to stay up late and prepare for your trial. Now you've been up almost all night. You need to get a little bit of sleep. You take an Ambien to get to sleep. Now you get up and you're a little bit foggy from that Ambien and you pound some coffee and maybe take another Adderall to go to trial. Now you overdid the Adderall and you're a little nervous public speaking and you take a half a Valium to take the edge off. And I know these people who have done this thing, and it's not that uncommon. And the football players take performance enhancing drugs as well. But the football players get tested, so they get caught. And then they have a choice. Figure it out, get better, or your career is over. Lawyers don't get tested, so we don't get caught. And it manifests after a long time only when it's really bad and far along and nobody can ignore it anymore. And because of that, it's had that much more time to develop. And it's going to be that much harder to fix it, to cure it. So that we're in that position because of the adversarial system. And the final thing that affects lawyers is something that affects everybody, but it affects us more in a unique way. And that is cognitive dissonance, which means noise in the brain, but it's discomfort in your brain when there's a conflict between your held values, or when there's a conflict between a held value and your behavior, which is not consistent with that value. And I submit to you that kind of discomfort that comes from inside your brain, from the inside out, is maybe one of the worst things to try to deal with. So people are really motivated to try to make it go away, right? And everybody can have it, but lawyers can really have it. And the reason for that is advocacy. We represent our clients, and our clients are trying to get something done, and it's our job to help them do it. And whatever they're trying to do may only affect them, but it may affect the economy, the environment, or other people. We're told to ignore that. It's not us doing it, it's the client doing it. So you have client A with objective B. And let's say, this happened to a friend of mine. He goes to work in the morning, gets called in. Kenny, we got an assignment for you. This is just a job for you. Meet client A. He's a real estate developer. He owns all this property that runs in and around these wetlands and marshes up near where you live, as a matter of fact, in Corte Madera, and he wants to pave the wetlands and build McMansions. But there's all these obstacles. Nobody wants to let him do this. Help him get it done. So my friend Kenny goes to Corte Madera City Council meetings religiously for a year, and he lobbies and he gets zoning variances and he cuts deals and he proposes a public-private partnership, and we'll put in some low-income housing and some infrastructure and sewers and streetlights, and he does 9 iterations of an environmental impact statement until he gets one that says a certain salamander won't be too adversely affected. And finally, he gets the green light. You can do this. And he goes to work, calling the partners, calling the client. I got a big announcement. Congratulations. You got the green light. You can go ahead, pave the wetlands and build your McMansions. Yay. Everybody's happy. They shove a cigar in my friend's mouth and they give him a big fat bonus check. Then he drives home that night. And turns out he's a member of the Audubon Society and the Sierra Club, and he likes to go out bird watching in these migratory bird flyovers that are now going to be paved and turned into McMansions. And he's sitting there with his cigar and his bonus check, and he's saying, "Man, well, I'm good. I'm a good lawyer. I did that. I got that done. What did I do? I hurt the birds. I love the birds. I feel bad. I don't want to feel bad. How can I feel good?" And then he spies his high-end bottle of scotch sitting over there on the counter, and I think I'll have a double scotch. And he has that double scotch, and now he doesn't feel quite so bad. I'll have another one. After that second double scotch, it's bird schmerds. I'm going to fire up the cigar, figure out what kind of new car I want to buy with my bonus check. So the thing about being told that we're advocates and the client's doing it and we're not doing it is that can be very little relief. We're told if we follow the code of ethics and the law, that takes us out of the equation. But the code of ethics and the law are not morality, first of all, but they're not even aspirational. They don't represent ceilings. They represent floors under which we can't go without getting in trouble. So you can follow the code of ethics and the law, but if you play an instrumental part in making something happen that doesn't sit well with your personal values, it can be not a good feeling. And then you can want to seek relief for that feeling. And people do. So this cognitive dissonance thing is a real problem. Nobody wants to feel bad. People want to feel good. People of substance want to feel good because they're good people who do good things for good reasons. And this advocacy role can create a pretty substantial challenge to that. So that's, the four main reasons that I have come up with that are unique to the profession that I think combined cause us to have the highest incidence of this problem of any profession. And hopefully, you've landed in a space in your career, in your professional niche where you don't have to come across this that often. But, I was a true believer in the type of law I did, and I still came across it once in a while. And it's not a good feeling, to think that the very thing that you do for a profession, the place where you apply all your gifts and talents, is helping do things that you would rather not have happen. So, that's why it happens to anybody, addiction, and that's why it tends to happen to lawyers. I'm going to talk about this last part is a case study, and I'm Exhibit A. I use myself for this case study because I know things about this that I hope you never have to learn, and I know them because I went through it. And I think it's valuable for you to hear from the mouth of somebody who was a lawyer, who was an addict, has much in common with you, and is willing to talk about this because I want to make it real. And I want to make it real so you realize that it maybe could happen to somebody maybe you, because I didn't ever think it was going to happen to me, and it did. And nobody I knew thought it was ever going to happen to me. But I also want to impress you with how absolutely horrible it is to suffer from this disease, because I want to instill in you some respect and fear for it, so you'll be motivated to try to make sure that you don't stand idly by while it happens to somebody and that you certainly don't let it creep up on yourself and find yourself in those shoes. So, case study, Exhibit A, me. Who am I? So for a while, you'll recognize this as sort of a legal term. It's called laying a foundation. And it might sound like I'm bragging at first, but I'm laying a foundation for the proposition that up to a point, I would have was considered the least likely person to end up where I ended up. And I thought of myself as the least likely. I felt I was immune to this thing. This is something that happens to somebody else. So I was the middle son of a middle-class family in the Midwest. I grew up in a suburb of Ohio. Totally normal life, middle-class lifestyle. My mom was the president of the PTA. There was no abuse and no alcoholism in my family. I mean, my dad sold Allstate insurance, in the 60s and 70s. It can't get much more normal than that, right? And that meant I was in good hands too. So, no excuses. Um, but, I feel like I remember
I'm
having
sorry, I just have to interject. Thank you for that pun.
I, yeah, if there was a hook that I could be hauled off stage, I think that would earn it every single time, but I can't resist. But I had a lot of those personality traits I mentioned, from the start. And that's kind of what gets people into law school. I was competitive, I was ego driven, I was high achieving, I was smart. And the thing is, the first report card I got in the first grade had all A's on it. Now, when that happens, there's only one way to go, which is down. And I didn't ever want to get a B. A's are beautiful. They're symmetrical. They look like little rockets and they go shoot up in the air. B's are lopsided and sideways and no B's for me. Thank you very much. I have never had a B. That's my compulsiveness, my competitive, my ego driven. So when you're that way, you start to do anything to keep that going on. So I remember in high school, I got parts in the school play. I sang in the choir. I played on the football team. I was on the baseball team. Oh, as a Boy Scout, I had to be an Eagle Scout. And when I got into student government, somebody had the gavel, and I wanted that gavel, and that was the president, so I had to become the president. And back then, we had school crossing guards. You were allowed to actually walk to school. It was amazing. You didn't have to wear a helmet or anything. And so they had these crossing guards, and they had the safety patrol, and there was a guy who had the gold badge, and that was the captain. And I wanted that gold badge, so I had to be the captain of the safety patrol. And I graduated from high school at the top of my class of 700 people. And I go to Ohio State, and after 4 years there, under the plus minus grading system, I graduate as the valedictorian of a class of 7,500 people. 4 point average. An A minus would have destroyed the perfect symmetry of that 4 point. It would have been a 3.9876 or whatever. I couldn't let that happen. But I never got a single A minus in a program that had A minus grading system, and the compulsion. So, I was the valedictorian, and then I, took the LSAT and destroyed it. And then I got into a great law school and I moved to California and I go through law school and I work at some big firms and I get offers, but I hate it. And then I was fortunate enough to do an internship at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office and I loved it. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I said no to the big money and all that stuff. And I took the job and I became a San Francisco Public Defender. And I was good at it. I was passionate about it. I did dozens of jury trials, and then I left that office and spent another 9 or 10 years as a solo practitioner after 3 or 4 years as a public defender. So that's my resume, that's my career, but that's only part of it. Here's the rest of it. I am, as I speak to you now, a recovering intravenous crystal methamphetamine addict. I'm a convicted felon. I'm a disbarred California attorney. I'm somebody who spent 6 months of his life in a maximum security county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit before orange was the new black. Wasn't cool. It was just orange. I've spent 11 months of my life in 3 separate residential rehab programs. One of them court ordered, and ultimately I have 4 felony convictions. I don't know if I mentioned that. And ultimately, I spent 18 months, a year and a half of my life, drug addicted, homeless, and destitute, living on the streets of San Francisco. So there you go. How do you fit all of that in one life? It's like schizophrenia. There's a one-word explanation for it, and the word is addiction. In my 3rd year of college, I no longer could naturally keep up what it took to maintain these grades. I was taking, graduate level econ courses, which I had no business taking. And I had a final exam coming up at the end of finals week. I was exhausted. I had to get an A. This is one of those econ courses that has like Greek symbols and equations and calculus and all this stuff. And I was burnt out at the end of finals week. And I couldn't do the all-nighter I needed to do. And some kid in the dorm gave me a pill. Here you go. This is what you need. Well, what is it? It's a diet pill. Where'd you get it? From my mom. Her doctor prescribes them. I take them out of her medicine cabinet. Really? Well, what could go wrong? I take this pill. It's pure amphetamine. It keeps me up all night. I'm laser focused. I study for my exam. The next day, I ace the exam. I was a competitive runner back then. I do go for my daily run, personal best time. Did you guys know you can run fast on amphetamines? Yeah, which is good because eventually there's people chasing you all the time, you know. And if you're a runner, you want to stay skinny. And I come from this German family where we know how to overeat, but it was a diet pill, so it suppressed my appetite. This was the perfect drug for me. And it wore off, and I felt fine. I went and saw that kid and told him, give me as many of these pills as you can. And for my last year of college, I probably never wrote a paper or took an exam when I wasn't under the influence of amphetamines. And I became mildly addicted to them and dependent on them. Then I moved to California for law school, and I need these things, and there aren't any pills in California. And so somebody, helpfully in law school, supplies me with some crystal meth. Here's what we have out here. It's a powder. Snort it. It'll do the same thing. I was never going to do street drugs. Every addict and alcoholic will end up doing everything they say they're never going to do. So now I'm on crystal meth in law school. And I go through my entire law school career using crystal meth. And there was a cohort of us in school who all were doing it. And I didn't have to go to a bad neighborhood to do it. I got it from another law student. And then I get out. I was under the influence of crystal meth when I took the bar exam and passed. I was under the influence for my entire public defender career, for every trial I did, most of which I won, and for my entire career as a solo practitioner. I'm here to tell you right now that from my third year of college to the last day I practiced law, I was never not under the influence of amphetamines. And they worked pretty well most of the time and for quite a while. But you know, you can only do a highly addictive drug for so long before you get addicted to it. And I was addicted to it and I could manage it, but then something happened. I said intravenous crystal meth, right? I had this girlfriend after 15 years of doing this drug, who was a nurse and liked to do it as well, but she knew a different way to do it, which was by loading up a syringe full of it and giving me a shot of it, and a professionally administered shot of crystal methamphetamine. And that happened, and I'll never forget it. It was the most amazing 4 or 5 hours of my life, and nothing was ever the same. When it was over with, I looked at her and I said, I want to do this every day. And that's what I did, and that's what we did. And when you use more and more of a drug, you shoot it, you use a ton more than when you're snorting it, you get more of the bad side effects. And in this case, the bad side effects are visible weight loss, malnutrition, bizarre behavior, delusional thinking, paranoia, irresponsibility, and all those things happen. And in a courthouse where I'd been known and respected for 12 or 13 years, people started to notice I was getting weird, and I was representing all crystal meth dealers, and the narcotics people didn't like it. They put out the word, help us get this guy, and we'll give you a license to deal drugs in San Francisco and a get out of jail free card. A client of mine informed on me, a warrant was obtained, my office was raided. I was handcuffed to my chair for 4 hours while they searched my office. They found enough evidence to charge me with 4 felonies, and I was taken across the street, kept chained to my office chair for hours while the police waited for all the media to show up outside, the network affiliates with the vans and the cameras. I get hauled out in my handcuffs doing the perp walk on the news on all stations over the weekend in the whole Bay Area. Booked into the county jail, spend the night in jail, appear in the court the next morning for an arraignment in front of a judge at whose house I'd had dinner and with whom I'd played golf, enter a plea, get out on bail, and then spend the next year trying to stay out of state prison. And the DA desperately wanted me to go to state prison. By that time, by the way, I had an intervention done by my family and friends. I'd been in a 28-day program, it didn't work. But I'd also burnt through my money, my family, and my friends, and I had no support network anymore, except 2 of the best lawyers in town who were my friends and represented me for free. And after a year, we miraculously managed to get a plea that kept me out of state prison. And it involved pleading to all 4 felonies, resigning from the bar, $5,000 fine, 3 years probation, 6 months in jail, 6 months court-ordered residential rehab, and 3 years state prison suspended. So I go through all this, and after a year, I step out of this rehab program, and I have almost all my possessions are gone. I have no money, no job, no place to live, no car, no law license, and 4 felony convictions, and I'm 39 years old, standing on the street. What am I going to do? I mean, I literally don't have anywhere to go tonight to stay. And if I did, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I got to rebuild my life. I lost everything. How did I get everything? I got it with crystal meth. Therefore, I better go get some crystal meth so I can rebuild my life. Broken brain. Takes a long time to work your way out of this when it's as bad as that was with me. So that was my plan. I may not surprise you to know it didn't work. I found myself living in a repurposed U-Haul truck out on the edge of the San Francisco Bay in these abandoned railroad yards with all these other drug addicts. And I would walk around all day and scrounge through dumpsters. You figure out like what places have the day old sandwiches in the dumpsters. And I was eating out of dumpsters. I ate at every soup kitchen in San Francisco. I can still give you a culinary review of all the different ones and which ones are best. And I wandered around. I had long hair. I had a backward baseball cap. I had a beard. I was pushing a beat up mountain bike, scrapping metal to turn into recycle to get money for drugs. And that was my life. And it just went on day after day after day. And nobody in the whole wide world knew where I was. I was invisible and suffering and not able to figure out how to get out of there. And it just went on and on. So, I needed to get some insight. I needed enlightenment. I needed an epiphany. And that happens when you hit your bottom. And I apparently hadn't hit it yet. So things were going to have to get worse. And they did. One day I go back to my truck and it was gone, towed away for unpaid parking tickets. So my shelter, my truck had a cot and a Coleman stove in there, was gone, but it also had the few kernels of remaining possessions that I'd managed not to lose, the things that you hope and assume that you're never going to lose in life. Before everything was online, a family photograph album with historical photos of my whole extended family, gone. My law school diploma, gone. My undergraduate honors thesis, a hard copy of it, gone. A little shoebox with my Eagle Scout badge and my Boy Scout merit badges in it, gone. Growing up, I had this beloved German grandfather, my grandpa Otto, and I was his favorite grandkid, and he lived next door to us. And I hung out with him, and he taught me to grow things and build things and fix things. And right before he died, he gave me his hand-carved, wooden-handled German pocket knife to remember him by. Gone. And I'm standing on the street. Sorry, Grandpa, I lost your knife. Winter's coming. I don't have a truck. It's going to be rainy and cold. What am I going to do? I could go to rehab. Now I've been to rehab twice. I could get off drugs and see if that helps. No, I lost my truck. I got to replace my truck. Therefore, I'm going to need some crystal meth so I can replace my truck. Good idea. That didn't work either. So now I spent another 9 months homeless for a total of a year and a half on the streets of San Francisco. But now I'm wandering around in the cold and the rain. I'm sleeping in cardboard boxes, bushes, under loading dock overhangs to try to stay dry. I'm learning how to steal loaves of bread that are on racks cooling behind bakeries and eat them, run around the corner like a character in a Charles Dickens novel and shove a whole loaf of bread in my mouth because I don't want to get caught. I'm on probation and I'll go to prison because I'm so hungry. I got stabbed. I was beaten with a 2x4, went to the hospital twice with overdoses. And I learned some things that they didn't teach me in law school. I learned what it's like to be so hungry you steal a loaf of bread. I learned that if you're sufficiently exhausted, you can be cold and wet and shivering and you can still go to sleep. And when you've got some sleep and you're a little less exhausted, you'll wake up and you're still cold and shivering. But mainly I learned that it's not enough to want to die. You have to be able to kill yourself. And I didn't seem to have that in my skill set. So this is just going on and on and on. Complete incomprehensible demoralization. No idea what was going to happen, except I just wanted it all to be over and it wouldn't end. And I couldn't get an appointment with Dr. Kevorkian. So it just ground down like this. And then here's what happened, as will happen, things conspired to bless me and save my life. So at a certain point, I had a tent and a sleeping bag, a little camp on the outside of town. And one day I walked 3 miles from my camp into this residential neighborhood called Potrero Hill and down in San Francisco, where a friend of mine lived from back in the old days when I was a human. And he would sometimes let me sleep on his couch, take a shower, and he'd give me something to eat. I got there and knocked on his door, and he wasn't home. I waited. It got really late. He didn't come home. Now, it's midnight and I'm 3 miles from my camp. I'm not going to walk that far back. I can sleep anywhere. I've slept anywhere. So I look around and I find this playground next to his house, and it's got a sliding board with a sandbox under it and a little wooden structure around it. And I just decide to lay down, jeans and a t-shirt. I weigh 130 pounds, July 24th, summer night in San Francisco. I lay down in this playground and go to sleep. And as I'm going to sleep, I say to myself, based on what I knew, something I hope you never have to learn, but I knew it was when you're homeless, the best thing that ever happens is you go to sleep. Because when you sleep, you can dream. And when you dream, you can have a job, a life, a law license, a relationship, a place to live. You can be a human. But every time you have to wake up again. And when you do, it hits you like a ton of bricks. Oh my God, I'm a homeless drug addict. And then your hierarchy of needs kicks in. Am I hungry? Can I find a bathroom? Can I get some drugs? Are the police going to come? And you have to deal for another day in San Francisco where you can't sit still unless you have money, and you don't have any. So I also knew, though, I wasn't going to want to wake up, but I knew I was in a playground. And if I didn't get out of there, there were going to be moms, kids. They'd probably call the police. Last thought, get out of here in the morning. Don't stay, get out. So it turns out the night didn't go the way I wanted it to. The wind kicked up, the fog rolled in, and I got up wet and shivering and cold and started walking around trying to figure out a way to get warm. And I started screaming because I couldn't find anything. And I pulled up under a street light and just screamed the word "what" over and over again. And I was crying and just hysterical. And it was 3 a.m. in this quiet neighborhood. And, I didn't get any thunder and lightning right then. I calmed down. I screamed so loud, I damaged my vocal cords. I couldn't speak for 3 weeks. I had to write notes to communicate. But I calmed down. I went back to my friend's house, and that's when I pulled out this tarp from his truck. He was home then. And I went back to the sliding board, rolled up in this tarp. And that's when I got all toasty warm, like this little speed freak burrito, and then had that self-talk about how I was going to have to get out of there in the morning. But what happened is I can hear the birds singing. I can hear the kids playing, and I'm in my tarp, warm, and I'm not coming out. You're going to have to pull me out of here with a tractor. I want to be dead. The next best thing is at least to be unconscious in this warm tarp. And eventually something started poking me in the side of the tarp, and I tried to ignore it, and it wouldn't go away. And finally I had to deal with it. And I stick my head, I'm snarling out, and I was looking up at the bright sky, squinting, and this little blonde girl, her hair is silhouetted against the sun like a halo. She was my saving angel, and she had been poking me with a stick. And when my head popped out, she threw the stick up in the air and jumped back, and she screamed, "He's alive." And her mom came to get her, and as she's pulling her daughter away, she says, "You didn't touch anything, did you? You better come and wash your hands." So this was pre-COVID. I found that kind of insulting, right? Turns out there's 3 moms, about 7 kids. They're on their regular outing to the playground. They've been taken off to these bleachers on the side. Can't go on the sliding board because the man's there. Now, if you have kids, this makes the sliding board the most desirable piece of playground equipment there is. Can we go yet? Can we go yet? No, the man is there. I'm trying to get out of there, extricate myself from my tarp. I'm nasty and drug addicted and hateful and unpleased with this situation. So I get up, I get on, I put my backward baseball cap on, and I'm dragging my sorry butt out of there. And as I'm doing that, one of these moms decides to give the kids a lesson in life, use me to do it. And she points to me and she says to these kids, and I heard her, I don't know if I was intended to, but God bless her, she may have saved my life. She says to the kids, "So who knows what we need to do so we never have to live like that man?" And I heard her say that, and I'm not proud to tell you that my first reaction was it pissed me off. I wanted to turn on my heel and rip off my baseball cap and say, tell them not to go to law school. They'll be all right. But instead, it hit me like a freight train in my sternum. It's like, oh my God, I need to figure out what I need to do so I don't have to live like this anymore, because I'm not going to live like this too much longer. I'm going to die out here. And that day, I walked myself out to my third and final treatment program. It was in the bad neighborhood of town. It was a county-run program, and no more swimming pool, no more volleyball. They took me for my food stamps and my GA check, and I stayed for 4 months. And I did something I've never done before, which was listen to people and do what they told me to do, even though I didn't think they were as smart as I was, because they knew something I didn't know, which is how to live without drugs. And I learned how to do that. And I'm here to talk about it many years later. I survived. Almost everybody I knew who was out there with me is dead. When your demographic is homeless, intravenous drug addict, you don't usually last long. I don't know why I got chosen to survive. Not my job to answer that question, but I did have to figure out what I was going to do about it. I decided to take what I had learned and learn more. I did the the training, and got good at being a drug and alcohol treatment counselor. I worked in a bunch of programs. Ultimately, I completed the lawyer assistance program. They hired me. I worked for them for a year. And then for 15 years, I've been working for the other bar. So this is my job, to speak to you, to answer that phone, and to try to help other people so they don't have to go where I went. You can help me do my job in 3 ways. One, do not become somebody I have to help. Think of what you've heard here. Think of what might apply to you, and watch out. It wasn't going to happen to me. It did. It can happen to you. Second thing is, if you see it in a client or a colleague, in somebody else, don't just watch and wait, hoping it'll get better. It won't. Remember, it's progressive. It needs to be addressed. Pick up the phone and call me at the other bar. And you can remain anonymous. You can say, I do family law in Beverly Hills. And a bunch of us know each other, and we know this one lawyer. She's a good lawyer. She's been around forever, but something's going on with her. She's lost weight. She's late. She's not doing well. We don't know what to do. I'll ask you a bunch of questions. I'll find out as much as I can find out, and you can remain anonymous. And I'll call that person and tell them, I work for the other bar. We have a hotline. We have people who are concerned about you that call and think that you maybe could use some help. I'm here to offer that help. It's voluntary, it's free, it's confidential. Can I help you? And people hang up, they say F you, but sometimes their voice breaks or they start to cry and they say, oh my God, yeah, it's time. Please, what can you do to help me? And even if they hang up, there's life before and after that phone call. At the least it does is plant a seed. If I'm getting a call like that, maybe I need to give some thought to what I'm doing to myself. And the final way you can help me do my job is to help us stay in business. We survive on donations. We barely make our budget. I'm a contractor. We have no employees. We have no brick and mortar location. I drive my own car. I use my own phone. We barely make our budget every year. Everything helps. So, if you want to make a tax deductible donation, you can go on otherbar.org. There's a PayPal function there. If everybody who's watching this gave a little bit of money, it would help us survive for another month. Because if we go out of business, people are going to suffer, get disbarred, and die who could have been saved because nobody else does what we do. And I would like us to be able to keep doing it, and we can with your help. And that's all I have to say today. Okay. Thank you for having me, everybody. Have a great weekend.